Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Zakiya Thomas, who is the new Executive Director of the National Woman's Party, which is headquartered here in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being here, Zakiya.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I know that you're new to this position, but you're not necessarily new to people in our viewing audience here in Fairfax County. You were Sheriff Stacy Kinkaid's campaign manager in 2015, and then in 2016, 2017, you were the campaign manager for Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax.
Yes.
So some people know who you are, maybe some people don't know who you are, but you are a graduate of Fairfax High School. Which,
proud graduate of Fairfax High School.
And so all three of my kids also graduated from Fairfax High School. Chap Peterson is also a graduate of Fairfax High School. But I'd like to kind of share with our viewers a little bit of how you went from Fairfax High School to William and Mary, to a master's degree in social work, to a political career as a very successful campaign manager, and then on to being the new executive director of this very well-established women's organization.
Well, it wasn't a direct route, as you can imagine, but I've always found myself in a place where I knew I could make a difference. And so that's really how I ended up where I am today. So as you mentioned, I went to school. I grew up here in Fairfax, and I went to Fairfax High. Graduated, went to William and Mary, one of the best schools I think ever. Go Tribe.
Go Tribe.
Go Tribe. There I was able to find my own way. And that way took me eventually to, when I graduated, I started off in consulting. So I started off doing office work for a large multinational corporation. Went to smaller and smaller firms until I found one that actually let me help people in a more direct way. So we actually provided services to, services and programs to underserved populations, so women, children, minorities, in areas such as substance abuse and mental health, HIV/AIDS, domestic abuse, domestic violence. And from there, I realized that there are a lot of inequities in the world, and there are a lot of inequities in our systems, and I wanted to understand them better, which led me to go back to school after about 10 years out to study at Columbia and get my Master's of Science in Social Work. And there I focused on social welfare policy, specifically focusing on children and women and family issues. So that policy perspective actually enabled me to think more about how we can use policy to help people in their daily lives. So policies can be oppressive or they can be helpful. And so my goal was to learn how to use policy in a helpful way for people. And from there I went back to consulting because, well, let's face it, a social work degree doesn't always pay for itself.
Correct. I mean, when you think about the fact what it takes financially to get a master's of social work, if you go and do direct services with a master's, and there are plenty of people who do that, it hardly is a good cost-benefit analysis when you look at it. Because
Yes.
those particular positions, while absolutely necessary, do not pay well.
No, they don't. And if you go into that field, then you know what you're getting into. But I like to think that you do it not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's the right thing for you at that time in your life. And for me, it wasn't quite that time. I volunteered for about, for a number of years now with Fairfax County in their parenting education program. And that's how I usually keep my skills fresh, because it's my way of giving back directly, while my day job is how I give back on the macro level. So that's how so when I left my social work program, went back to consulting, was overseas for a while, came back, and then I ran Justin Fairfax's first campaign in 2013 for Attorney General. Learned a lot from that campaign, went back to consulting, and then I ran Stacy Kinkaid's campaign for Sheriff of Fairfax City and County.
And both of those, in their way, were groundbreaking candidates. Stacy Kinkaid, although she'd been with the Sheriff's Department, I think at that point, 26 years, she was still the first woman ever elected to that position as Sheriff of Fairfax County in 271 years. I stood at the polls, I'm like, 271 years. So that was groundbreaking. I mean, she's so qualified. I mean, she was the most qualified person on the ballot. But all those 271 years, and no woman had ever held the post. Right. And the same with Justin Fairfax. We had Doug Wilder was the first African-American governor in the history of the United States. And that was so long ago. It seems so long ago now. Yes. For Justin to have run a campaign for lieutenant governor and to have won, you chose two candidates who, in their own way, were making a statement.
And like I said, I find myself in places where I can have the most impact. And I think in those campaigns, I was impactful because I was able to bring a skill set that was unique in that I had a lot of experience through my consulting working with small businesses and startups, and a campaign is very much like that. So you go from having zero name ID, zero constituency, very little revenue, to building a brand, building an organization, bringing in that customer base, those clients, which are your constituents, and growing something larger. And so that's really what I like to think of as my brand, is helping organizations develop theirs and grow an organization to achieve and succeed. With Sheriff Kinkaid in particular, she won originally in a special election, so this was really her first full campaign where she had to do it basically on her own, didn't have the same sort of momentum poured into her campaign as she did in the special election. And so it was a challenge for us, but it was a challenge that we were very much ready for. As you said, Sheriff Kinkaid was highly qualified and has done a phenomenal job in taking that agency from where it was to being one that's more involved in the community, that provides more services for their inmates, and that actually does a better job of making sure that inmates are ready to go back into society and succeed and not return. So she's done phenomenal work with that organization.
And you're absolutely right about that. It's not just our idea of law enforcement in a very narrow sense about keeping the public safe and locking up dangerous people. You know, she introduced the Diversion First program, which has really blossomed in the last 3 years. More and more police officers, as well as the deputies, have been trained in Diversion First. Greater mental health services, triaging the people that they interact with to decide if jail is really the right place for them or they need a different kind of treatment. And then again, you know, rehabilitative services so that when people come out, they are supported to return to their communities.
Right.
That's a very different way of looking at law enforcement. I don't think that's what people think about when they think of law enforcement professionals. And I love the fact that she's introduced something different.
And she does. She's also very engaged with the community. So she makes sure that residents of the community interact with her agency in a way that it's not just when something goes wrong. So she's out there, she's connecting with people at community events, at festivals, bringing people to the jail to see what's actually being done, opening up the jail for tours so that people who are interested to see how things actually work do.
Yeah, no, I've been there, and it is fascinating, I'll tell you that. But, you know, back to your kind of unique set of skills, this is what I think is interesting about secondary education or higher education. You know, we kind of think that you are a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, you're a teacher, a nurse, or something else, and yet we have emerging industries, there are jobs that haven't been created, there are industries that haven't been invented, and so how do you educate a population of people to fill those jobs unless we start talking about skill sets, like going and getting a master's degree in social work and taking those skills and deploying them in a unique and different way.
Right. And I have to say, I use my social work skills every single day in every job I've had since. Because it's to your point, I gained a set of skills that helps me learn how to motivate people, how to encourage people, but also how to use the resources we have around us to improve our situation.
So I know that the only reason that you're here tonight is because normally you volunteer on Monday nights.
I do.
But it's Columbus Day,
yes.
So you're not volunteering tonight, so that worked out for both of us. So you do volunteer for a number of organizations. You're also on the board of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia.
Yes, I am. I've been on the board for a few years now. It's a fantastic organization that pushes for women's rights, specifically through reproductive rights, through the policy level most effectively. And I'm on the C4 board. And a lot of the work that we do is really advocating for certain policies and certain individuals who help push those policies forward, working with partners across the Commonwealth in order to advance Medicaid expansion, the Whole Women's Health Act, and a variety of other issues that are important for women across Virginia.
So I see kind of a common thread in all of these things and the things that you've chosen to do as a volunteer and your board service and the fact that you work for candidates who are also focused on these same things. Right. I think that was kind of the core of Justin Fairfax's campaign as well. And I see that Tim Kaine is also running on, you know, justice for all.
Right.
I mean, and it really, and that's the last part of the Pledge of Allegiance, and he says they could have stopped, but they didn't. They said liberty and justice for all. That's inclusive of everyone. And we can't look around today and say that we have equity in our communities or that everyone feels like they're being served in a just way.
Right.
So, you know, I just find that you gravitate toward these things, but they're all very different.
They are, but I think the common thread, like you said, is we're all helping to advance the end goal being justice for all, or equality for all, or making sure that everyone has some stake in the game because they're getting something out of it. And so for me, and one of the reasons why I'm fortunate to be in the organization I am now, is I find that I like to be the person who helps others make the world a better place. And I can do that in this job, and I've done that getting Stacy Kinkaid elected, helping to get Justin Fairfax elected. And I think that going forward, that's really who I am and the core of what I want to do.
Well, so it seems normal, natural to me that once you connected with the National Women's Party, they could clearly see that these very amazing skills that you have would be well suited to an organization that's been around since 1916.
1913, actually.
1913, and then they changed their name in 1916?
So there was a name change, but the organization, the core of the organization, was founded in 1913. And the founder, who spun off from another organization, that's when they actually started to get to work.
They did. And so obviously they started on the 19th Amendment, but as you so eloquently put it, that was not the end game.
No, the 19th Amendment was a means to the end, and the end being full equality for women in the Constitution. So our founder, Alice Paul, was actually the one who drafted the original Equal Rights Amendment shortly after the 19th Amendment was passed. And so once suffrage was won on the federal level, then we turned our focus to equality for women and codifying that in the Constitution and pushing forward for the Equal Rights Amendment, but also for improving laws and legislation across the country to increase the rights that women had and the protections that they had in those laws.
So this is, we think of the ERA trying to amend the Constitution as going back to the 1970s, but actually goes back much farther than that.
It does, and so the history of the history starts with the Equal Rights Amendment. We actually put it forth much earlier, but it took a while for it to get ratified and to get pushed through Congress, but then also to be ratified throughout the rest of the states in the Union. So we only have about 35 states, I believe, that ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. But then recently, as of the last few years, we have 2 more states that have ratified, bringing us ever closer to the goal of 38 states ratifying. It looks like there are a few, even Virginia, who might be next in that process.
Yes, and we're going to come back after this break and talk about how Virginia could be very key to getting this back to the federal level. So when we return from this break, we're going to be talking with Zakiya Thomas. She is the new executive director of the National Women's Party, and they are focused and have been focused on equality for women. So join us after the break.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. Better than ones get on. Very excited, all that I could do was remember you. You know I usually say no, but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I
Right?
mean, like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did you?
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Zakiya Thomas. She is the new executive director of the National Women's Party, which is based in Washington, D.C. So Zakiya, we've actually had a call from Carmen in Richmond who wanted you to illuminate a little bit about the difference between suffragettes and suffragists, because there seems to be a common misuse of those two terms.
Right, so suffragettes are actually the British equivalent of what we call the suffragists here in the United States. And they actually had a much more militant background. They broke windows, they
burned down buildings.
They burned down buildings. And actually the founders of the National Women's Party did learn from the suffragettes in Britain, but they brought tactics back that were a lot more peaceful. So we picketed. We were actually the first ones to ever picket the White House, and we had the march down. We had the march in Washington, and that was actually the first march on Washington that ever was held. Was actually held by the organization that Alice Paul was a part of at the time. And so we actually were the first to march on Washington. And actually, when you look back at the Women's March, you'll see there are photos from when we marched back in the day to the Women's March today, and you see pretty much the same thing. You see women out in numbers to fight for their own rights.
Right, so the Capitol building doesn't change, and the hordes of women don't change, but some of them are wearing sashes, and some of them are wearing pink knitted hats,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the pink knitted hats, but women, I think the thing we should really recognize is that 100 years later, whether it's 1916 or it's 2017, we still have women out marching for essentially the same things.
Yes, unfortunately, things have not changed. We've had a lot of positive changes, but not the level of change that we would hope would have happened in the 100 years that we've been fighting this fight. And so, as we start to look towards the 100-year celebration of the centennial of the 19th Amendment, we're actually planning a lot of activities and partnerships and collaborations around this as well.
Because you have, the Belmont Paul Equality National Monument?
Close.
Close?
So Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument.
Women's Equality National Monument. That's long. Okay, the Belmont Paul House or the house. But, that's where your offices are. But you have an enormous number of artifacts over this past 100 years. You've maintained them. You've curated them. They're in collections. People can actually go and see the exhibits there.
Right.
But you're also going to take your show on the road.
We are. So we are proud to host the oldest feminist library in the country, and I believe the world as well, which has an extensive collection of that's been acquired over the 100 years that we've been an organization. And so with that, we're going to take part of our historic collection to different states around the union. Our goal is to take it to as many states as we can, basically to use it as a vehicle through which people can have conversations about the women's movement, women's rights, looking at the history of the women's movement and what it means for today, looking at equal rights and the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment and how it's continued on today. We are a 501c3. We are no longer a lobbying organization.
Right.
So we are focused more on educating and informing people so that they can draw their own conclusions, and using this collection as a way to do that. The first state that we're looking to take the collection to is actually here in Virginia. Virginia is actually poised to be one of the next states to actually ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, which would then bring it back to the federal level. And we don't know what's going to happen then, but we're excited about the prospect of that and what that will mean going forward.
So there's actually a brand new website that's been put up. It's
2020 Centennial.
2020 Centennial. The numbers are at the beginning. 2020centennial.org.
Right.
And so that's a place where people can actually go and look at all the things that are the events that are being added, and there'll be a lot of events taking place, exhibits that'll be in collaboration with partners. It's very interesting to me because we live in such close proximity to DC. We're basically a suburb, Fairfax is. But, do people in Iowa, are they as plugged into this? Are people in Texas as plugged into the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment? Do you have a sense of that?
They actually are, and I've actually been on the phone with a number of people from around the country about the centennial and about what we're looking to do, but also about the Equal Rights Amendment as a whole. And so there is a large group of people out there who are very much interested in this. And the website that you referenced is really a clearinghouse for activities and organizations to post information about the activities that they're having around the centennial. So it's a great place for you to go, 2020centennial.org, to see what else, what is going on in your neighborhood or in your community to learn more about the
So you talked about the fact that you're not really a lobbying organization, you're more of an educational organization now.
Right.
So not so much people marching in the streets attached to the National Women's Party. But talk a little bit about the fact that, you've also walked a very narrow line about not being partisan,
right.
that equality for women should not be a partisan issue. And in fact, the history of the suffragist movement is very interesting for how it kind of split at one point, and there were feminists who worked through the Temperance League. Mm-hmm. So they convinced women, if you want to shut down saloons and outlaw alcohol, the only way you can do that is if women get the vote. So it seems to me that was a point at which you kind of saw women choosing different paths.
We did. And so back to your point, there has been a division in the country along partisan lines, but we've done a very good job of walking that line, working with both sides of the aisle. We actually started off as an organization that didn't affiliate with either party. We actually were trying to hold the party in power to account when it comes to women's rights. And so because of that, we've maintained a long history working with Republicans and Democrats and establishing relationships, particularly on the Hill, with both sides. So we're in a very good position to work with Democrats and Republicans and other organizations to push ahead in this endeavor.
So let's talk. So since we're talking about presidents, let's talk about Woodrow Wilson.
Yes.
So many people, when you talk about Woodrow Wilson, they're like, League of Nations, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, that was kind of cool, but people are neither all good nor all bad.
No.
They're complicated.
Yes.
And Woodrow Wilson was a very complicated man.
He was. And so Woodrow Wilson at first didn't take the suffragists seriously. As I mentioned the march earlier, the march was actually coinciding with his inauguration, and more people were actually at the march for women's rights than they were at his inauguration. And also, as I mentioned, we were the first organization to picket in front of the White House. So you'll see signs, you see pictures of women holding banners that say, Mr. Wilson, President Wilson, when will you give women the right to vote, and things like that. So basically, they were standing there as what they like to call silent sentinels, who were protesting in a very peaceful way, and in order to draw attention to the rights of women, and specifically the women's right to vote, and the fact that we didn't have the right at that point.
And they were very persistent. And I will point out that this is one of the nonviolent movements that became a hallmark, the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, Gandhi was a big believer in nonviolent protest. And so they kind of embraced the fact. So 6 days a week, they didn't do it on Sunday, but 6 days a week, they stood outside the White House carrying their banners. They didn't bother anybody, they didn't block anything, they just minded their own business, but they wanted to be relentless in reminding people that they didn't have the vote.
I would like to say there was one protest done on a Sunday. It was called the Working Women's Day, and so that was actually intended for women who worked to actually have an opportunity to join in the protest as well. So
see, that's a cool thing. These are the tiny bits of history that you wouldn't know unless you actually go and look at the exhibits to see that there was one Sunday when they actually had a protest for women who work.
Right. And so the protesters actually protested, and they had a lot of attention, and they made sure that the banners were printed large enough so they could be seen, photographed well, and put in the news. A lot of the tactics that you see that they used were actually tactics that we use today. So the protests in and of themselves are really a way to draw media attention to their effort. As the war progressed, and as the U.S. jumped into the war.
The Great War.
The Great War.
World War I.
Yes, World War I. As the U.S. approached joining the war, there was a lot of pushback against the suffragists for protesting in a time where everyone should be rallying behind the president. But they noticed that during the Civil War, when the women fighting for the right to vote paused to support the war efforts, they lost
They lost ground.
They did. They lost ground, and so in order for this movement to not lose that same momentum, they actually continued protesting, which was pretty radical at the time, because most individuals thought that you should support the president, you should support the government, and that protesting was the wrong thing to do. But they kept at it, and in turn, they were arrested, they were jailed, and while they were in jail, they went on hunger strikes and were force-fed, and some were even housed out at the Occoquan workhouse,
right.
Which brings a little bit more home to Virginia for us here. So there was a lot.
There was, and the interesting thing about the use of the media. So I will mention that the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial is trying to memorialize that site near the Occoquan workhouse, and where those suffragists were and it was like they were denied habeas corpus. They were not charged with anything. No. They were simply picked up, put on a train, taken to the workhouse, and kept there, right? But apparently they were able to sneak information out, and it was through the international media. It was headlines in other newspapers abroad that brought pressure on the Wilson White House to release those women.
Right.
They were being held without charge.
Yeah, and they used that to their advantage. So they knew very well what they were doing in those instances. And like I said, a lot of these tactics that were used, you see today, and they're used in the movement and in other movements as well.
Right, only we have social media now. So it's a little bit easier, but I don't even know what to say about that because it's so crazy. I mean, I think social media has been a double-edged sword. It has allowed people to organize and to communicate, but it's also allowed for the spread of fake news,
right,
and half-truths and untruths and a lot of things that have misdirected and caused a huge amount of divisiveness. And I think that's really kind of where we are right now is, how can it be divisive to think that women should have the same rights as men? How is that a divisive movement?
That's what I like to think, but the reality that we face is that it is. For some people, they think that if you give women equal rights as men, it's threatening in one way or the other. I would like to think that having equal rights just puts us all on a level playing field, and that it empowers women to do what they need to for themselves and their families, and it also empowers men to be supportive of their wives and their daughters and their mothers as well. I think it's important for all of us because when you empower when you empower half of the nation, we can only go up from there. Where else could we go?
You're absolutely right about that. And so I would like to think that as time goes forward, especially now that we have younger people taking an interest in this too, they'll be going like, I don't understand why the original framers of the Constitution and of the Declaration of Independence, when they said all men are created equal, they took that literally. But I think as time has gone on, we understand it really is everybody. Right. So when we come back from this break, we are going to be talking with Zakiya Thomas from the National Woman's Party.
I surrender.
All right, pal. Get ready for the day, buddy.
Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad. Do we have a gun?
What's that?
Do we have a gun?
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
Love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
I tried Oxy at a couple of parties. I thought I had it under control. I didn't know it'd be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth.
What to expect when you're expecting.
Like here?
A teenager.
Today, I'm going to show you how to teen-proof your home. First step, hide the car keys. Preferably somewhere they would never look. Challenges will come up. Be ready for them. Hi, honey.
I'm ready for the... Mom,
You don't use mannequins in the mannequin challenge.
You don't have to know it all to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Zakiya Thomas, who is the new executive director of the National Women's Party located in D.C. Thank you for taking time out to do this on your night off, because I know you would otherwise be volunteering, Zakiya.
Well, I'm happy to be here. And one of the things I want to make sure we talk about is the house itself. So I alluded to earlier, but right now the National Monument, it became a monument in 2016. Before that, the National Women's Party actually ran the monument. Back then it was just the Sewell Belmont House. We have the large collection of feminist articles, but we also have a large collection of women's rights articles as well. And so if you want to come visit the house, right now when we became a monument, we partnered with the National Park Service. And it's a phenomenal partnership wherein they maintain the house and we maintain the collection and we work together on programs.
Nice.
Right.
That's nice, because capital maintenance is very expensive.
It is, and it enables us to have a stronger partnership with the Park Service so that they can give tours, so that they can have programs there, and we can collaborate on that as well. And they collaborate on our programs as well. And so it's been a phenomenal partnership for us because it expands our reach, because we are now included as part of the National Mall's, the pyramid of parks in the National Mall. And so we have more visitors because of that. And it's expanded the number of people that we bring to the house and the reach that we have for our collection. So it's been quite wonderful to see that transition. And it also enables us to do more in the community as the National Women's Party, as opposed to just focusing on the history that we have with the house itself. We use the house and our history as a platform on which we can do additional work, which is what we are looking to do in the future.
And your offices are actually located there, so you have kind of cool, you're not just in an office building, you're in sort of a living exhibit.
We're in a living museum, and the monument is fantastic in that respect because we have people stop by thinking that we are the monument, because our offices are on the ground floor, so we have a separate entrance, and so people will stop by thinking that we are the monument. And they're like, "Oh, can I have a tour?" And we say, "Well, yes, you have to go upstairs for the tour, because we are doing our work for today, and the Park Service is running the tours for today." But it's been a great opportunity for us to work with such a phenomenal agency in order to use their resources whenever possible to leverage our resources and vice versa.
You know, and I think that's important for organizations in order to stay relevant. You kind of have to evolve and figure out how to adapt so that you can continue to be relevant, to grow, to maintain these records. I mean, it would be very expensive to maintain a historic, that house is very old. It's a couple of 100 years old.
It is a couple of 100 years old, to the point where after we celebrate the centennial, we're actually going to have to close down the monument for a couple of years to do massive renovations to it, which will be great when it reopens, because we're looking to re-envision some of the exhibits that are there.
So when it's closed, will you take then some of the exhibits, and is this part of where you're working through collaborations and partnerships to take the exhibits and put them in other locations?
So we are in conversation with the Park Service about exactly how that's going to work out. But this also goes back to the traveling exhibition I talked about earlier. So part of what we're looking to do is to continue that beyond the centennial, so that we have that, or a portion or something similar, traveling around to represent the National Women's Party and women's equality, even while the monument itself is closed.
So what are some of the partnerships you have? I think you have a relationship with the National Archives.
So we have a relationship with the National Archives as well. We also have a relationship with the Smithsonian, with Folger Library, with the Library of Congress. We partner with pretty much every museum or organization or historical organization in the district, and also some outside of it as well. Because we have such an extensive history and collection, and because we're such a storied organization, we benefit from working with so many wonderful organizations and museums across DC.
Well, yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, I go and see these special exhibits, especially at the Library of Congress, so it makes sense that you loan some things out, especially for specifically focused kinds of exhibitions.
Right.
So you were saying that you're kind of looking at Virginia and kind of strengthening your partnership with Virginia. Obviously, during the legislative session, you're an educational organization.
Correct.
You don't lobby. But become the 2019 legislative session, which starts like the second week in January and goes through the end of February, there is a possibility that we could get the ERA to a floor vote.
Correct.
You may not be able to talk about that, but I can talk about that. So, you know, it's passed out of the Senate previously, which means that we do have bipartisan support in the Senate to have passed the ERA out of the Senate. It gets killed in committee, and so that is Speaker Kirk Cox. You can't talk about it, but I can. So I'm just going to say that, you know, one of the things we have to do in order to organize Virginians is for them to understand where it's being hung up. It's not getting to a floor vote. I think there are votes on the floor to pass the ERA. It's getting hung up in committee assignments, and it's getting choked to death in committee. And you can't say that, but I can.
Well, what I can say is there's a very strong effort in Virginia to advance the Equal Rights Amendment. And there is, to your point, bipartisan support. And I think that once the bill gets to the floor, there are the votes there to pass it. And so we have been working with the organizers in Virginia, helping them in ways that we can, given, as I said, our abilities as an educational and informational organization. And so we do collaborate with them to help to see where do we fit in and how can we help advance this process without violating our responsibilities. And there is bipartisan support in that group of people who is working towards advancing the Equal Rights Amendment. And they're working with both sides of the aisle. Senator Dance, actually, out of Petersburg, Rosalind Dance, she actually acknowledged our organization, the National Women's Party, and Delta Sigma Theta, of which she is a member, and the work that we did together around suffrage, but also around advancing the Equal Rights Amendment. And so there is a history of our organization in Virginia working alongside others to advance women's rights across the state.
You also bring up something interesting, and I love Senator Dance. She happens to be my daughter's senator. I'm like, Emily, your senator is Rosalind Dance. She's awesome. But, you know, the fact, too, that that women of color were involved in the suffrage movement. And that sometimes doesn't get to the surface, that it wasn't just white feminism that got women the vote. There were sororities, and there were women of color out there marching, and there were women of color actively involved. And it seems to me that we need to raise that up as part of this as well.
And you're absolutely right, and we are making a concerted effort to do that because our organization has a poor history when it comes to that. And one of the things that we're trying to acknowledge, and one of the things that we're trying to work forward, is acknowledging our past, but realizing that in order to move ahead, we need everybody together. And when we say all, we mean it this time, and that we want everyone to come to the table. And part of what we're doing now is trying to bring organizations together, because we are a safe space in which we can do this, bring organizations from across the board together to talk about what are these issues that we're all fighting for, what kind of strategies are being put together, and just facilitating that conversation rather than advocating one way or the other.
Oh, I think that's so true. And one of the things that I think that has amazed me is the power of black sororities. I mean, these women are so powerful, and I see them on Capitol Hill. I mean, when you talk about the confirmation of Loretta Lynch and how that got hung up, and then all of a sudden these women of color who are incredibly well organized, and they know how to get their message across. And it's true in Virginia. I see them down in Richmond as well.
Right.
And it seems to me that as well organized as these national sororities are, that this is a wonderful partnership to have.
It is, because there is strength in numbers, right? And we also know that we cannot do this alone. We've tried it alone before. And our history of being divisive and saying, well, we're just going to do it our own way, we can't succeed that way. And so we understand that it's important to not only have people at the table, but to support each other in that effort. And so we're very fortunate to actually now have the support of members of Delta Sigma Theta, members of Zeta Phi Beta, members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. All of them have come and are working with us in one respect or another to help advance this effort. So we are very excited about that. In addition to that, we're not just focusing on that aspect, but also looking to the Latino organizations as well, making sure that we're reaching out to Latino organizations, Asian American organizations, because equal rights for women is equal rights for all women, and making sure that that's understood not just from our rhetoric, but our actions as well.
You know, that brings up something that I had not thought about until this very moment, is that we look back historically and who was involved in the original fight for the vote. But you're right, what the women look like who are fighting for the ERA are every description of every community, and we don't always think about, I haven't thought of in terms of, are we being as inclusive as we can possibly be? You know, and I sit on the board of Equality Virginia, and I think that includes trans women as well.
Right.
You know, trans women are women, in my opinion. And so I think when we start opening up to say who is included in this movement, everybody's included in this movement.
And to that point, we actually were fortunate enough to have Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg join us for a discussion on Women's Equality on Women's Equality Day. So we invited women from across the country who are active in the women's movements across the board. And so it was just wonderful to see the response that we had to that, because we were very selective in who we chose simply because we wanted to make sure we had a broad representation. And so when you look at that picture, like, you see more people than you would have, or diverse backgrounds than you would have seen any other time in our history, because we're being very thoughtful about that going forward. So I think we're on the right path, and we're looking to make sure that we continue on the right path to be inclusive, because as we've seen, when we come together, we can do more than we could if we're apart.
Oh, I agree with that. And I think people are very sensitive if they don't feel that they have been included. And that takes intentionality. You know, we went to Netroots Nation in New Orleans, and Rashna Heiser, who I've had on the show before, was talking about the fact of all the speakers who got up and talked about inclusiveness, no one talked about people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, hello, that's a huge group of people, you know, that cuts across a lot of other diversities or distinctions. But people with disabilities, and all of us have an opportunity as we get older to be in the disability community, and yet we rarely reach out and say, people in the disability community need to be at the table.
Right. And it's about being intentional and being forward-thinking and making sure that you don't want to be the generation that excludes people like previous generations have been. And so we are very thoughtful about that as we go forward, and making sure that we are actually doing what we say we're doing when it comes to being inclusive and making that part of our mandate.
So do you think young people, I mean, young people have a lot on their plate right now. Look at the amazing Parkland young people and the movement they have started around gun violence prevention. But do you sense that millennials are also interested or focused on the ERA? I mean,
I think what we've seen, and even just the nature of where our office is, when we saw what was going on Capitol Hill in the past few days, just seeing the diversity of people who were there. You had young people, you had old people, you had people all the spectrum in between, people of all diverse backgrounds, men and women, which was interesting to see. And I think that's representative of what this movement is, and I think that there are people that are engaged in that respect. We engage in different ways depending on where we are at our point in life. And I think you see a lot on social media, and I think you see a lot of people engaging more locally as well.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Social media is its own thing. Join us after this break. We are talking with Zakiya Thomas. She is the new executive director of the National Women's Party, which continues to work relentlessly on passing the Equal Rights Amendment. So join us after the break.
This is the story of a boy who was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. It made him feel uncomfortable. One day, he found out he had something called autism. His family got him help, and slowly, he learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies.
Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.
Being a dad is an adventure full of special moments.
A cruise?
Ooh.
Drive!
Unexpected moments.
I got this.
And even awkward moments.
Okay, Dad, thank you.
But every moment you spend with your kids, even the smallest moments, can make the biggest impact on your child's life. So take a moment to be a dad today.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. You know, but it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me this evening is Zakiya Thomas, who is the new executive director of the National Women's Party. Thank you so much for being here, Zakiya. So here in the final segment, let's talk a little bit about all of the things that you've got on the drawing board and all the things that are like to be determined around the 2020 centennial. It's 2018, you've got 2019, and then you've got the year of the celebration.
Right, and so I would like to reiterate, so I came on to the National Women's Party specifically to enact this vision that we have of bringing the collection to a broader audience, but also bringing the National Women's Party back to the mainstream. So in that, we're looking to take the collection around to various states, including Virginia, as I mentioned, which will include part of our historic collection. We're still building that up and looking for folks who are engaged and excited to support that effort to bring it to Virginia, to museums and the like, so we're looking for venues as well. But what we're looking to do on the broader scale is work with partners to have a national dialogue around equal rights and around women's rights, bringing people together from all over the country to talk about different aspects of the movement and where different people fit in to have a broader conversation about it. Also looking to use our exhibit as a way to increase programming around conversations around around women's rights and the Equal Rights Amendment. We are also, as you mentioned, 2020 Centennial. That's part of the Women's Vote Centennial Initiative, and that organization is a collaborative effort to have a clearinghouse for different organizations to post their material, post their information about what's going on around the centennial. So you'll see over the next couple of years, you'll see organizations who got their start around this time. So there are a few organizations that we all know of that started that started about 100 years ago, this year or last year. So they're celebrating their own individual centennial anniversaries. And then we have organizations who are looking to celebrate the march itself, who are looking to celebrate the Equal Rights Amendment, the 19th Amendment passing, but also passing the Senate and in Congress, but also looking for like the final ratification as well. So there are a lot of exciting events that are going to be coming up that you can find at 2020 Centennial, that you can find on our website, nationalwomensparty.org, that'll show you what kind of events you can be a part of, whether it's a symposium or a conference or just a conversation in your own community.
So you, and I'm assuming that in your new role, one of the things you do is you also leave Washington, D.C. to take the message of what this organization's working on, what your goals are, what you're focused on, and what you have to offer out. So if people want to engage you as a speaker, have you on a panel, invite you to a conference, is that something that's within the realm of?
Yes, it's part of our education platform. So, for instance, I'm going to Charlottesville later this month to have a conversation about diversity and inclusion in the equal rights, in the fight for equal rights. So historically and currently for women. So that's actually being sponsored by the League of Women Voters, and we're doing this in partnership with them.
Oh, great.
In their local league. It's their Sundays with the League. They have these forums every so often. So we're going to be a part of that one.
That's fantastic. And yes, the League of Women Voters is another one of those organizations that's been around from the beginning.
Right.
You know, and you have to believe, I want to hope, that at this point in our history, for a variety of different reasons, that there should be the will there, the political will there to refocus on this. It has languished, but then when you think about it, getting the vote itself, you know, Seneca Fall was 1853, but it even started before that. I mean, why it took so long to get the vote and why it is taking so long to get this one amendment added to the Constitution that says women are equal.
Right.
Like, all people are equal.
And it's interesting because a lot of people, when I first talk to them about the Equal Rights Amendment, they think it's already passed. Because there are little pieces here and there. We have a patchwork of legislation
that's true
that empowers women. So we actually were part of the fight for Title VII. We actually our members helped get that passed. And so that is just an example of the kind of legislation that we fought for between the 19th Amendment and when we became a 501c3. So with that, we like to educate people that we have this patchwork here, but there's not any of those things can be taken away at any time. So we need to make sure that the equality is codified in the Constitution, and the only way to do that is to pass an Equal Rights Amendment. And so that's why we've really dedicated ourselves to this going forward, because we have the position that we can do that in a way that's effective because of the resources that we have, meaning the partnerships, the relationships, and the history that we bring to the table.
So I just saw this morning that there's a date has been announced for the Women's March for 2019. It's going to be January 19th of 2019. And since the whole world is now coming to Washington, D.C. and literally almost marching past your door, you know, I know it was just announced today, is this something where you might try to do programming around so many people being in DC at that time?
So we're actually working, I know our programs and collection staff are working in partnership with on this as well, and trying to figure out where we fit into that, given that what we're trying to do for our own organization, but looking at how can we plug into that effort as well, so that we're not duplicating efforts, but using our resources to amplify what's being said.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, like I said, I think it's an opportunity. Most people who come to Washington, people know the League of Women Voters, let's face it, because there's branches of the League of Women Voters and the American Association of University Women, and there's a lot of really well-known, we were talking about black women's sororities, which are very well-known. But the National Woman's Party, for as historically important as you have been, you're kind of rebuilding your brand.
We are. I like to say that we had our kickoff, well, at least with me, with our event with Justice Ginsburg, because that was our way of making ourselves relevant again with the larger community with which we look to work as we do this work. And so we have an uphill battle to do to make sure that we are in the rooms where these conversations are being held, and that we are part of the movement in a way that suits our purpose and drives part of our mission. And so we're working with other partners to make sure that that's what we're doing, and that's how we're engaging. So we are looking to collaborate with other partner organizations, even those we haven't yet reached out to. We plan to, because we want to make sure that we're doing the work. So we've talked with the League of Women Voters, with NOW, with reproductive rights organizations, with other voting rights organizations, and just making sure that people know that we are here, we're back, and we're looking to work in this space again.
And that's, to me, kind of, you're in a wonderful situation. You're brand new. The organization is rebuilding itself and making itself known. You're kind of in the fight for education to help people understand where we've come from, where we still need to go, and how we still need to get there. But that presents so many opportunities, like probably more opportunities than you can actually ever take advantage of.
It does, and part of what our collection is looking to do is to talk about what are the interim steps that we had between when we originally wrote the Equal Rights Amendment and all the incremental legislation and steps that we took in the interim that we fought for, that the National Women's Party was actually behind and backing, and that we did the research for, that we lobbied for, and that we were in Congress but also in state houses across the country. And so using that collection to talk about how you can impact that kind of change on the local level, but also on the federal level as well. And so reminding people of that role, but also talking about how we can be relevant in that space now through our education and through our convening of people.
So your challenge is that you're based in Washington, D.C. Yes. You don't have zillions of people spread across the United States. And you have a fairly small staff.
We do.
As most nonprofits, you know, I come from the nonprofit world, you come from the nonprofit world, and you don't want to spend a huge amount of resources on staff unless you are doing a lot of things that generate the sort of resources that supports a larger organization.
Right.
So you're doing a huge amount of work with a small number of people.
And the way we amplify our message is we work with partners and collaborations. We are very fortunate to have a very strong board. We have a large group of followers through our newsletter. We have a number of members across the country. We actually have a large membership, and we're re-engaging people in this effort. And so a lot of what we're looking to do now is to remind our existing followers that we're here, and we're doing such awesome work now. We're trying to reinvent ourselves in a way that makes us more relevant for today, and we're doing a good job of that. Even if you talk to some of our supporters who've been with us for a while, since I've come on, they said there's a new voice. There's a freshness to this that we haven't had in a while. And that's because we had a different focus before. But now that we are refocused on our original mission, we're ready to tackle that mission going ahead and looking for as many supporters and to help us in that effort as we can.
So we should mention that you have a Facebook page.
Yes.
You have a Twitter account. You just told us that you have a newsletter that goes out. So if people do want to get engaged, there's a number of avenues in which they can get information about what you're doing, where you are, and how people can get involved with what you're doing.
Yes, we have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Our website is great. We just launched a new website. It looks fantastic, and it shows a lot of who we are and who we will be going forward. Our new vision is to be much more out and in front of things than being the monument that we were and still are. But we'd love for people to get involved, to join us, sign up on our website. As I said, nationalwomansparty.org, and that's womansparty.org.
I know, right? It's got the singular.
Singular, yes.
Singular, but universal. So,
yes.
Woman's, it's big.
It's
very big.
But we do fight for women, but we are here for each and every woman. You can also join as a member, sign up to get our newsletter, join us at events. We have an event coming up on the 16th, actually.
Okay.
About race and gender in politics in 2018.
Ooh.
It's going to be a phenomenal event. Actually, the one of the chapters of Alpha Kappa Alpha here in Northern Virginia is helping to co-sponsor that event for us, and they're bringing some of their members as well. So we're really excited.
And that's
about
October
that.
16th?
October 16th at our house.
Okay, so that's a Tuesday.
It is a Tuesday.
At your house?
At our house.
What time?
7 o'clock.
And people can RSVP on your website?
On our website.
Okay. That sounds like a really awesome thing to start out with.
It is, yes. So we have, and that's just indicative of the programs that we have. We have book talks on Code Girls coming up. I don't know if any of you have...
I love that book so much. Liza Monday.
Yes, so Liza is doing a book talk with us. We're actually doing that in connection with eCity Books. So we're bringing folks together for that. There's also another book coming out for colored girls who've considered politics. Donna Brazil, Leah Daughtry, Minion Moore, and I can't believe Whitaker. I can't believe I forget the other author. But they're so Minion Moore and Leah Daughtry will be joining us for that book talk as well.
And we need to rewrite women back into the history. And Code Girls is just an astonishing story about 11,000 women who helped to win World War II, and then were never allowed to ever speak about it and have passed away without anybody ever knowing their story.
Right.
So I want to thank you, Zakiya, for being here. I think this has been very illuminating. I have learned a lot about the National Women's Party, because if you quizzed me before, I wouldn't have done so well. So this is great to have you here to tell us how people can get involved.
Well, thank you so much for having us. And once again, have people go to nationalwomansparty.org to learn more.
Absolutely. And this is something you can get involved in. Make sure that you go to find out about these upcoming events that are taking place at the Belmont Paul Equality National Monument on Constitution Avenue, because that's where you're going to find the National Women's Party. Thanks so much for joining us.